good day and welcome again to A Place Called Through. I am the host, Patricia Wade Goings, and we do broadcast from WYTV7 Community Broadcasters Network. A place called through, a place where people are always going through, getting through, and just trying to make it through to the other side of through where there's hope, there's destiny, and there is the promise. You know, so many of us go through different challenges, but so many of those challenges are so similar. So that's what we do here at A Place Called Through. We share these inspirational moments of hope, encouragement, and empowering to help you get through that place called through. And you know, we can only do that as we do so, and we continue to do it with this mission of hope. We do it globally to help encourage you, as we've stated, and that is done through those charitable donations. So we ask that you continue to sow that seed into this ministry so that we can do what we enjoy doing, helping to encourage and inspire other people. So I thank you in advance for giving into this ministry and encourage you to please go visit our website at wytv7.org. Sow that seed today, A Place Called Through. We'd like to take the time out now to welcome to A Place Called Through our guest today, Miss Deborah Greenhut. You know, she's going to share an amazing story, a story about a hoarder's wife. Hoarding, you know, it's an illness and it's a global illness. It's not just, you know, in South Carolina or California. It's a global illness and it does impact so many people. You know, and I just want to give you a few fact findings before, again, we greet our guest today. Hoarding, it is known as a mental disorder in which a lot of people collect a lot of items. You know, it could be anything, newspapers, just magazines, things that they enjoy holding on to, clothing, household items. But I want to share with you the statistics stated in 2020 that there was an estimated of 19 million Americans that now have that hoarding disorder. We welcome to A Place Called Through Ms. Deborah Greenhut, who will share a hoarder's wife story. Welcome again to A Place Called Through. Ms. Greenhut, for our listeners and our viewers, we want you to just take a few minutes out and share a little bit about yourself before we get into the story.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I appreciate the invitation. My name is Deborah Greenhut, and I have for much of my life been a writing teacher, so that was my vocation, but I've also been a hoarder's wife, and that's the story that brings me to you today. I've written a novel based on my own experience of a 35-year marriage where I lived with a man whom I loved very much, but who was also a hoarder. And as you mentioned, hoarding does affect a fair number of people on Earth. Some estimates are as high as 1 in 20. And certainly that is to be of concern because the point at which a person becomes a hoarder is not the collection point so much as when life becomes unlivable. The daily activities of life become too difficult to manage because you can't get through the house or you can't walk out into the garage or any other place you might need to go. Now, during my marriage, of course, it didn't start out that way, but it became that way. And by the end of it, our marriage ended in a tragic divorce, and then my husband ended his life with a tragic suicide. So that's something I draw on to write a novel called The Hoarder's Wife. And today I wanted to talk with you a little bit about that. You see, many people have probably watched those programs about hoarders, and they're pretty sensationalized. And the problem with that is that there are some other people associated with the hoarder, namely usually the family or some very good friends. And those people don't come up in the story. They're often standing in the background, trying to smile or trying to help or trying to change the deal. But it's the hoarder who has taken center stage. Meanwhile, there are some other disorders proliferating in that family that's being affected by it. So one reason I wrote the book was to talk about the family. So with that, I'm going to ask you what questions you have for me, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you today.
Well, let's go back to the very beginning again, you know, because the statistics are constantly changing and they've increased obviously since 2020. But it's fact finding is that at that time, 19 million people not 19,000 or 1,900, 19 million people were estimated to come, to be a hoarder. And, the statistics, of course, have indicated that the numbers are growing. But it also noted that more than 15% of the United States population was expected to, by the age of 65 and older, to be the prime age for hoarding. So at, the prime of life, as some would say, people are becoming hoarders. They're saving things. They're treasuring onto things, which causes more complications because some of the things, as we've talked before, trash, newspapers, it just piles up to be trash to, those of us on the outside, but to them, those are the things that they are treasuring the most. And, you didn't just wake up and, decide, okay, well, I'm getting married and, unbeknown to you, when you got into this relationship, this is where the discovery of the hoarding came to you, because the man that you fell in love with was not, you didn't know anything about the hoarding. Am I not correct on that?
That's true. I noticed some things about my husband, and the question of my giving up things for him to be able to keep things actually came up very early, but I didn't recognize it to be hoarding. And I think there's a larger story around the hoarding itself, which led to the disorder that he had. So if I'm not being too confusing there, my husband asked me to give everything to him. And I'm not exaggerating. It could be anything eventually from a closet space to books of mine that he liked, and unfortunately also a baby. So he expected me to give over what I had, and he was the keeper and I was the giver.
Amazing that he would get to that point, to ask you to actually let go of everything that you were holding dear to for, himself, not knowing that he was actually, acting out of not kindness or who he originally would have been. Because we're going to talk about that a little bit later, how, hoarding actually is a mental illness and the things that go along, with hoarding. But then your family and your friends, prior to getting married, you were holding, hope, just like most young ladies, and I'm sure the young guys on, oh, I'm going to marry, my soulmate, or, I'm going to marry the perfect person. But as as the years began to grow into your marriage, you notice the change in the personality and in the habits. So how did you cope with that?
Well, I guess I was primed to be a giver, and I felt a lot of compassion for my husband, who was also a giver. When we first met, I felt that he very much wanted to do things for me and with me and to have a family. We discussed it, we agreed on it, and I really felt that that was where we were headed. And I'm not sure, I could pinpoint an exact moment, but I remember experiencing him as a keeper fairly early in the relationship. When we moved into our first house, or our first apartment, which was after we got married, he felt that I had too many things and I should give up some so he would have enough closet space. And being a good sport, I thought, well, I carried a lot of stuff from graduate school. Maybe I don't need it all anymore. So I gave up some books, I gave up clothing, I gave up a fair number of things, and we did have somewhat limited space. But I noticed, even though he had a perfectly good working office in his job, he needed to have the extra bedroom we had at home for his office. And I was also a teacher at that point, and I was given a kind of a back closet. It wasn't much of a room. It was more like the size of a closet. And that's the space that I had in our home. And I think things really began then. So I can't say I wasn't aware of it, but at the time he was coming up for a promotion at work, and he was very nervous and agitated. So I thought, okay, let's try to keep the peace here. And I think that was the kind of error that I perpetuated over and over again throughout the marriage, in terms of being a giver instead of a keeper.
And so in this given situation, there became, I would say, selfishness, because now he's taking from you, and you've already made this sacrifice because you're staying here, so now he's like, okay, depriving you in a sense of the things that you were actually, close to the things that you want. So that when he, the suggestion here is that when he took the things away from you, what was he doing with your things?
Mostly telling me they had to leave the house, that we didn't need them and there was no space for them. And I was taking up too much space anyway. So it became just a gradual, kind of subtle removal of my own boundaries in order to make room for what he wanted to have.
Now, okay, so he took away from you totally, so discarding your items, but yet he was still compacting on the things that he desired.
That's correct. Yes.
He kept himself going while he was taking everything away. But you had children, so what kind of effect did this have on the children?
Well, I have to say before I talk about that I think my children had some remarkable innate resilience because they've grown up, they have their own families, and the hoarding doesn't seem to be part of their lives. It's not who they are. But I think there were a number of things that were problematic. Let me say that at a later age in life, my husband was diagnosed with ADHD. And that might have explained some of the evolution of the hoarding, but we did not know it at the time we got married. In fact, nobody was talking about adult ADD at that time, so we couldn't have known it. But we were talking about the children, and my sons were often compelled to be much quieter than two little boys probably needed to be. Their dad was taught electron microscopy, and he was always trying to concentrate, and he had a very difficult job of that. So I think some of the consequences we felt had more to do with the ADHD than the hoarding at first. They were restricted when they came in the house. They had to be very quiet and make sure he wasn't working hard somewhere in one of the many places that he wanted to park himself for the day to do work. So he was often taking up space and pushing back other people's boundaries in order to do what he needed to do for the day. And my kids were extremely tolerant of it and very accepting. I don't know that that was the best thing for them, but it kept the peace in our house. And there was a lot of love in our house in spite of all of this. And they loved their dad very much to this day. But they could also recognize that there were certain flaws.
So what kind of occupation did your husband have? What was his occupation?
He was a professor.
Amazing. Here he is, a professor. So he's kind of like he was living a double life in one sense, because here he's a professor on this side, teaching and educating on this side. But then I guess you would say in the afternoon or early evenings at night, then this other side comes out where he's compacting, things. And it's interesting to be, what was he, a professor of what?
He was a professor of engineering, so he was often working at the subatomic structure of materials, which is a pretty refined specialty that he had. I think, in retrospect, that it was probably the ADHD that was causing a problem for him. And you may have heard that expression, the absent-minded professor. Well, this was my husband. He lost his keys on the table in front of him. He couldn't find calendars, notebooks, couldn't keep track of any of those kinds of things. And he probably needed a personal assistant, but he was not willing to give up any tasks to anyone else.
And as you said, because the ADHD was not, something during that time frame in adults that was actually, a study or anybody really knew about it. So that kind of, I guess would say camouflage what was actually going on with him until later. And we'll talk about that in the next half of the story, about how things, evolved out and how it was all diagnosed and handled. So we're going to get ready to take this quick commercial break. Then we're going to come back with you, Ms. Greenhut, and we're going to continue talking to you about the Hoarder's Wife story here at a place called Through, where we're broadcasting from WYTV7 Community Broadcasters Network. I am your host, Patricia Wade Goings. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this commercial.
You're invited to the Smart Strategies for a Slim Body Masterclass hosted by Integrative Healing Arts and Simply Fit. Throughout the demonstrated masterclass, you'll learn healthy habits that will slim you down, like making time for exercise and finding a quiet place for meditating. Throughout the masterclass, you'll learn about acupuncture and sleep, as well as balanced meals and responsible snacking. For more information about the May 21st masterclass, just click the registration link that you see on the screen.
Welcome back to A Place Called Through, where we're broadcasting from WITV7 Community Broadcasters Network. I am the host, Patricia Wade Goings. And today we've been honored to have as our guest, Ms. Deborah Greenhut, who has been sharing with us a hoarder's wife's tale, a tale who has been going through so many hardships and trials as living with a hoarder. So she's here to continue as we're going to wrap up our story as a hoarder's wife. You know, we talked about hoarder in over 19 million people enduring, you know, in the year of 2020, it was estimated that 19 million people would endure being hoarders, you know, and it's alarming because those numbers are constantly growing. The emotional issues that come out with that. During the time when she was enduring this hardship, her husband was diagnosed as ADHD. And, you know, it's amazing because for adults, it really was like an undercover thing. It was not discovered until many years later that he had this illness. And mental illness, depression, thoughts of suicide, you know, all occur as part of this hoarder. So we want to continue with her and talk to her some more about the effects, the emotional side, because she gave up so many sacrifices. She stayed in the marriage, had children, loved her husband dearly, you know, and she tried to make all of this work as best as she could possibly do. Even I'm understanding through mentorship and counseling, but there was just a dark side of this hoarder that just said, oh no, we can't move any further. So we want to take you back to that part now. You know, her husband was a professor of engineer. You know, by day he worked faithfully, you know, did good at his job. But then there was another side of this, you know, that dark side that took this family to a place as they were going through. So Ms. Greenhut, welcome back to A Place Called Through, and we want to continue talking to you. We understand that you also had children that were involved in this marriage, and you had stated previously about, you know, your husband wanted you to give up and actually, you know, kind of in a way forced you to give up some of the things that you liked, that you treasured, just to accommodate his needs. So take us there now about your family and raising your children, you know, during this process.
Okay, I guess one place I could start would be to say when we got married, my husband said we would have a 2-career marriage because I was earning a PhD in English and I planned to finish that and have a teaching career. And each time though push came to shove and I got an interview, my husband said, well, that's very nice for you, but we're not going to move to Atlanta, or we're not going to move to Ohio, or wherever the job was. And by the way, you cannot take the children with you. So if you want to go and take that job, that's fine, but I'm going to stay here and so are the children. So I was faced with a career dilemma pretty early on in the marriage with those decisions coming up, and I kept putting off my own career. I took a lot of adjunct positions and whatever 1-year jobs I could get, but I was constantly looking for work. Eventually, an opportunity to go on the road as a corporate trainer came up. And since he had told me I could travel anywhere I want to, I took that as a decent halfway measure that I would be able to work as much as I wanted to. But it did mean I was going to be away from my children, which I will say broke my heart. It was the 70s and 80s were difficult times for women who wanted to have careers because there really were not resources or help available to make sure that one's children were taken care of. So while I was in a fortunate position of having an advanced degree and some earning power, I was also unable to take advantage of a lot of the opportunities that came up. So I worked a few days a week and I had some career satisfaction, but I never got at that point the academic career that I really wanted. So my children, who are, as I said, just wonderful souls, still remember many things to be happy in our household. And we surely did take a lot of vacations we enjoyed. We were together and we enjoyed them very much. For me, there was, as you said, always that undercurrent of unhappiness. But at the same time, I treasured my family. And apart from wanting to have that career, I also wanted to have the family. So I put a lot of that aside. My kids ask me to this day, though, don't you remember, Mom? Don't you remember the happy things? And while I was writing the book, I was having a hard time remembering the happy things. For a long time, I thought I never want to hear this story again. And when my husband committed suicide, I didn't want to think about it, hoarding at all anymore after we cleaned out the house. I just didn't want to be part of it. And I wanted to say that chapter is closed. But after the suicide, I started thinking about it a lot. And I thought, it isn't about me anymore. That part of my life is over. But how many families are there? As you point out, 19 million hoarders must be related to someone. How many families are there who are being affected by this? And maybe my story could help. So that was an important thing for me. I realized I would have to write the book. And I didn't want it to be a memoir because I do value my children's privacy and my family's. But I thought I could draw on that story and bring some things to light that might be helpful to other people who are trying to decide whether to stay in that horrible mess or to leave or to find out where to get help.
And then in your, staying, through this, hoarding, because it's collecting items, things are just piling up and piling up. So the deterioration to the house itself, was there any deterioration to the house while stuff was just being accumulated?
Yes, I can tell you that we once had a lovely sunroom, and over time we had some problems with the roof, which my husband thought he could fix, but always procrastinated about doing. And eventually there was a hole about 10 inches across where you could look up and see the sky through the roof. There was no story above it. And rain would come in and it would ruin anything that was positioned underneath the hole. And he refused to do anything about it, refused to let me call a contractor. And this seems to be part of the story of many hoarders, that repairs don't get made, the house deteriorates. There are various stages of being a hoarder. I think they commonly identify 5 of them now. And we were at stage 5 by the end of the marriage.
Oh my gosh. And yeah, that, it is noteworthy because as I was reviewing this, it says hoarding can be a very dangerous to physical or mental, the physical and mental health of our loved ones and your home. It says hoarding dangers do include the growth of mold, bug infestations, structural damaging, tripping hazards, mental overwhelm, stress, and anxiety, all of which you had to endure. But
Yes.
Yet you stayed, because of who you are and because of your children and your love for your husband, even though he had an illness and you knew that, okay, things are kind of like really tipsy-turvy here, but you stayed anyway, because again, I would say contributed to all love. But hoarding, is something that can be persistent over time. And as such, in your case, it wasn't persistent. It just continued and continued and continued to grow until, unfortunately, your husband's passing away. But we are just glad that, you are surviving and that you have, come on willingly to share your stories and hope to help someone else. Because as we stated before, there's so many people going through the same, if not similar situations. And, because hoarding can lead to suicide, we want to offer for our listeners to reach out. If you know someone that's in this situation and they're having thoughts of suicide, there is a national suicide prevention number. And I want to offer that up right now. That number is 1-800-273-8255. Get the help, help someone else. Again, that national suicide prevention number is 1-800-273-8255. If you're in a hoarding situation, there's also a national number that you can contact to help get your items cleaned up. They'll work with you during the mental process as well, refer you out to counseling. And that number is 1-800-462-7337. And that is the national hoarding cleanup number. Again, 462-7337. You know, hoarding, again, it does affect so many people in so many ways, you know, and it's just that right now we are in a better place where there is more available help as was not available to you during the time when you were going through this. But we just want to thank you for sharing your story and your information. We know that you do have a book out, Hoarder's Wife. So tell our listeners and our viewers where they can find your book and about your book, if you will, at this time.
Thank you. The Hoarder's Wife was published this month by Woodhall Press in Connecticut. You can order this book anywhere books are sold, which includes Amazon and Barnes and Noble, or any place you know a bookseller who has online ordering capacity. So it's very easy to obtain. It's also available in online format for Kindle and for Nook readers. So that's another way that you can get it. I have a website, deborahgreenhut.com, where you can find out more about what I'm doing and publications that I've made. I've done a number of print interviews where you can read a little bit more about the hoarding situation. So I encourage you to take a look at my website, deborahgreenhut.com, and I'll look forward to hearing any comments that you have. I hope this is going to be an open dialogue with me and my readers, because there's so much shame connected with hoarding and we have to stop it.
Yes, and you know, give them the information again, if you have an email address or a contact phone number that they can reach out to you. And as you see now, the clock is fastly ticking down. But, you know, final word of encouragement for someone who may be going through or has just come through, what would you say to them?
You can leave if you need to. You can also get help. And I know that you can leave because I did it, but a lot of people are afraid to go. So a lot of people are trapped. So think about this question, which I think is most important. Do you want what you have? My husband used to say that question, and I thought it was a very perceptive one. Do you want what you have? Not do you have what you want, but do you want what you have? And he seemed not to want the mess around him, but he seemed powerless to do anything about it or to accept the help from people around him. So think about it for yourself. I did not want what I had anymore in that home or in that marriage, so I had to leave.
That is just amazing. And again, we do thank you for being our guest and talking, you know, about those very personal matters that have affected your life. And, you know, we just thank you for being who you are, your willingness to help other people who are going through these same situations. But I want to remind our listeners and our viewers again for the National Suicide Prevention number. That number, once again, is 1-800-273-8255. And the Hoarders Cleanup number is 1-800-462-7337. You've heard it here today on A Place Called Through from Ms. Deborah Greenhut, who is the author of Hoarder's Wife. Please reach out to her. She is available and willing to work with you. You know, maybe she has some ideas or suggestions of that can help you. During her time of enduring this, it was a really hard time. As we know, hoarding can complicate many situations, does complicate relationships and the change of lifestyle. It is an illness. It affects millions and millions of people, and those numbers are constantly growing. So we want you to reach out again, get the help that you need, help someone else to be inspired and encouraged as we do so here on A Place Called Through. I am the host, Patricia Wade Goings. I am evangelist Patricia Wade Goings. I am also the author of Willpower, The Call to Rise Above. If you'd like to be my guest and share your inspirational story, please reach out to me in area code of 843-608-9744, or you may find me in area code of 843-812-1958. And you may send me that email again at pgoingswp@gmail.com. And my website is www.willpowerthecalltoriseabove.org. Once again, I thank you, Ms. Greenhut, for being our guest and sharing that most inspirational story. And I want to remind our listeners and our viewers that this show will air on Tuesday at 6 p.m. And again, if you would like to be our guest and if you just want to call us for prayer or just to chat, I am a health and wellness and a life coach as well. So I look forward to hearing from you as well as seeing you again on A Place Called Through. It has been my pleasure. I wish you blessings and love. Thank you again, Ms. Greenhut, for being our guest today on A Place Called Through. Blessings and love.